Hello and a very warm welcome back to the garden. It's the 1st of March and that means lots of sowing and lots of planting, and that's exactly what I'm going to be doing today. Today I'm going to show you the full process that I do for sowing seeds in modules. Now, growing undercover is fantastic because you can extend the season and you have that protection, so it's easier to look after your seedlings because cold weather is still very much about. Now, the first thing that you've got to consider when sowing in modules is what kind of module trays are we going to use. So for decades, us home growers have been having to rely on these second-rate kind of plastic trays that, unless you treat them with extreme care and caution, will only last 2 or 3 seasons at most. They very easily rip. Now, in recent years, due to increased environmental awareness and demand, we now have much better access to horticulture or industry grade module trays like this that are made out of solid plastic, many of which are from recycled plastic. And these are an absolute game changer because these have revolutionized module sowing for home growers. Before, they weren't available to us because you could only buy them in the hundreds of thousands, but now you can buy them in the dozens. And the fact that they can last up to 15 years, potentially more, is just absolutely amazing. Now, there are 4 main module tray sizes that I use, and if you want to know where I get these are from Container-Wise. So if you're in the UK, you can buy these from Container-Wise. They are obviously going to be heftier in price, but the fact is you're buying quality, and especially when you're gardening, and the fact that you can work with these quite quickly, you don't have to be careful when you're planting out or sowing in them. It's going to save you a lot of time in the long run. So there are 4 different sizes here, and the first size is the smallest size. These are around 30 mil in width, and this is great for smaller seedlings such as spinach, lettuce, fennel, and perhaps things like flowers such as cosmos. And then the next size up that I love to use, this is around 42 millimeter width. This is the one that I use the most. I find it to be the most versatile, whether it's your salads, even brassicas, root vegetables. This is absolutely a dream to work with, and I think I need to get more of these. Now, this here is a much larger one, and to be completely honest with you, it was something that I didn't know I needed until I gave it a go. So this is around 75 millimeter in width. So it's like the size of a standard pot. And the strength of this is if you have particular seedlings that you want to grow on that can't go out because perhaps there's not enough space, such as brassicas, you can either transplant them from this and put them on into these, or you can use this to start things like herb cuttings, and you can keep them in here for as long as you want, and you don't have to worry about them running out of nutrients and compost. And then the final one, which is absolutely brilliant, this is a deep-celled one that has replaced these root trainers. Root trainers are great, but unfortunately they only for me last around 5 seasons, even when I'm trying to be really careful. So this deep cell one is absolutely brilliant for starting plants that like deeper roots, for example your broad beans. The next core part of module sowing is understanding what kind of medium you're going to be sowing your seeds into, and of course that's going to be compost. Now, I honestly believe that the whole idea of sowing and compost has been overcomplicated over the last however many years. I'll tell you something, I only use homemade or multi-purpose compost. I don't buy any sort of kind of special seed starting mix, etc. I find it to be a little bit of a waste of money, and everything seems to be working well, from things like tomatoes and aubergines all the way through to lettuce. But I'll show you a few things that's actually going to help. So the first thing, which is the best if you have access to it, is actually loads of beautiful homemade compost. Now, this compost is made using the lazy composting method, so you can check out the video in the corner to find out more about that. All I do for using compost when sowing is to give it an extra few months. Whereas normal compost might be ready after 6 to 8 months, perhaps 12 on a particularly bad year, I'll give this at least 12 months, preferably just over a year, to properly break down. And the reason why I like it to properly break down is that it gives it a chance to have a lot of biology, it creates a good tilth, but one thing you might find is that you don't actually have that much homemade compost. So what you can do is you can actually dilute it. So you can have 2 handfuls of homemade compost and then add in a full handful of soil from the garden, from one of your raised beds, just to help the compost last a little bit longer. Now, if you find that your particular homemade compost is drying out too quickly, what you can do is on purpose make a load of leaf mould, or if you have a local woodland or forest nearby, get a little bit of leaf mould, and you can do the same. You can add 2 handfuls of compost to 1 handful of leaf mould, or even 1 handful of compost to 1 handful of leaf mould, mix it up, and then use that as a brilliant low cost and highly effective potting medium that isn't going to dry out too quickly. And we'll come on to tricks of stopping compost drying out towards the end of the video. Now, another thing you might want to do is to actually buy compost, and there's 2 that I would recommend. The first is the Soil Association approved organic compost, this Melcourt. This is really nice things to start off your seedlings in. Again, you can dilute this down with soil as well. And another great one to use is Dalefoot as well. Dalefoot is also organic. So if you're out of homemade compost, or you want to use your homemade compost for mulching the beds, then you can buy those. Just make sure that it's organic approved and you're good to go. Now, something you might be wondering is, do I need to sieve the compost? And I never bother. Even if I'm sowing really fine seeds, for example lettuce, all I do is, if I do see quite a big thing like that or that, I just pull it out. But chances are the compost is broken down so much, so you've got that lovely crumbly texture, you hardly need to pull anything out. I find sieving a little bit of a waste of time, and it doesn't happen in nature, so why do we need to do it in the garden? It's now time to come to actually doing the process of planting seeds in modules. So this is my potting bench, really simple. This here is kind of a potting bench tidy. So you can either build your own out of some scrap wood, or you can buy it online. The idea for this is, when you're using your compost, I'm using the Melcourt one here, is you're not going to spill the compost over all of the sides. So it means kind of minimal waste, and if you need extra compost, you can just like scrape it all together. It's just really easy to work with, less mess, and it means that you can work faster as well. So the first thing you want to do is to grab whatever module you're going to be doing. I'm going to show you firstly sowing radish in these, and then I'm going to show you sowing field beans in the deeper one. So the first stage, get it there, and then you just want to basically cover it with compost, so you basically can't see the tray underneath. And then gradually you're going to press down and away, so you can see that this is looking pretty good. Now, there's another thing that I would like to do after this. I like to firm it in, because it means it's easier to pull out the seedling with a firmer soil, and I can fit more in. So I just kind of go in with my fingers like that, pressing it down, not too hard, but a nice, like a nice firm handshake is kind of that kind of translation in terms of putting the compost in. And then you do the same. You place it over the top like that, spread it out, and that is ready for a soaking of water. Once you've filled it with the compost, you want to actually give it a really good soaking, because it makes it a lot easier after you've soaked the compost well and let it sit for about 5 to 10 minutes so it properly permeates. It makes it so much easier to make the holes in which you're going to plant the seeds. Otherwise, if you don't do this method, you find that the compost actually falls back in on itself. So give it a good water, let it stand for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then we can move on to the next step. So this has had a nice soaking. It's kind of been standing for about 5 minutes. It's ready for the next stage, and that's about making the holes. So there's a couple of ways of doing it. If you don't like to get your hands dirty, you can use something like a pen to make holes at whatever depth you want. However, I prefer just to keep things simple and to use my fingers. And what you can do is you can use multiple fingers at a time to make the desired hole. And I never strive for perfection. People can really easily get caught up on how deep to make the holes. As long as you keep it at an approximate depth, depending on what you're sowing, it's still going to grow fine. I'm going to be sowing some radish here, so I don't want them to be super deep. So I'm just going to make some holes around the depth that I like. So you can see quite easily how quickly, just doing this method, that these holes are ready. And if they're any too shallow, I just go back over and make sure that they're fine. So next thing to do is to grab the seeds. And I'm going to be using a multi-sowing method for these radish. Multi-sowing will be a kind of a whole video in itself. The best person to find out about multi-sowing is Charles Dowding. The method has been used for industrial horticulture for many years as a way of growing multiple plants in a single cell, so they can kind of grow apart from each other when you transplant them. So it means transplanting less and growing more. It's a real win-win. So you can do it for things such as radish. You can also do it for a lot of your root veg. Beetroot is excellent for multi-sowing. You can even do it for things like leeks or spinach, all of that. So I'm just going to put a nice decent load into my hand, and then because I'm multi-sowing, I'm going to aim for around 4 to 6 seeds per module. But if I put a little bit more, I don't mind. I'm just going to crack on. I don't ever try and do this perfectly. It doesn't need to be done. So I just kind of go along, making sure that I'm filling them up like that. These are all sown. I'm just going to grab a load of compost again and just spread it over the top. It's such an easy way of filling it like that. Now you can press just very gently down, just like that. Not too hard though, now that the seeds have been done. And then the next thing to do, before you forget, is to label, because it's very easy to think that you'll remember. I've done it too many times and then end up forgetting what you've planted. So here I'm gonna write radish, and I'm also gonna write the date, just as a nice reminder. And this I'm actually using, I like to use yogurt pots and cut them down as my seed labels. I never buy seed labels. These work an absolute dream. And I've got a video that'll be linked in the description, which will show you just how easy they are to do. So I'll put that in. And then the final thing to do is just to give it a really quick water. It's already had a deep water, but I'm just going to give it a nice shallow water just to make sure that the surface is nicely watered. After sowing your seeds, the next thing to think about is where you're actually going to put your modules. Now, what I love to use, and this is what I'd recommend, is some kind of shelving system, a tiered shelving system that has mesh. So it isn't like flat, it isn't like solid wood, it has mesh because you want air to be underneath. Now the great thing about these container-wise modules is that there's a big gap underneath which naturally prunes the roots of your seedlings, which stops them spiraling around and becoming root bound, and it helps to encourage a strong root growth. So what you do is make sure, this is actually just a simple mini greenhouse kit. I've got a Patreon video talking in more detail about root pruning and using these mini greenhouses, but you can just stack them and store them here. Now, before I talk about the last few things, I just want to give you a really helpful tip, which is after you've sown your seeds, you don't want this to dry out, because it is crucial that during the seed's germination process, it doesn't dry out. So for example, if you have sporadic germination of say carrots or parsnips outside, and I'll be doing a masterclass on direct sowing, chances are it's sporadic germination because the soil dried out, and you want to avoid that. So I've got a really easy method of doing that, and it costs nothing. So this is some cardboard, all right, super simple. And what I do is I'll actually take off the label and I'll place the cardboard on top like that. And the idea is this almost acts like a mulch. What it does is it stops water from evaporating. So it means you don't have to worry about these drying out during really hot days. So the next thing I'll do is I'll grab kind of some stones, 4 stones on either side, just to make sure it's all covered over kind of like that. Probably put a heavier one in the middle. And then finally put your label under stone so it doesn't blow away. Or you could even write on it or hide the label underneath, it's up to you. And then what you do is after a few days you start checking underneath daily, and as soon as you see the first signs of growth, then you remove this. And it means that the seeds will germinate really nicely for you, and there'll be a separate video all about seedling care, so you don't have to worry too much about what do I do when that happens. So that's just a really simple thing you can do. You can also use newspaper. So here's just a very quick demonstration with the deep module tray. Same again, just pile the compost on top, and you can see how having something like this helps keep it all of the compost around the same area. Push it down, so kind of away and down like that, and then push it in. And I'm going to do the same just to top it off at the top, and then I'm just going to go push it down. The next thing to do is give it a really nice soaking, and then leave it aside for around 5 to 10 minutes. Next thing to do is just to make the hole. So I'm going to be sowing some field beans, which are just like fava beans or broad beans. So I want them around 2 inches or 5 centimeters deep. So again, you can use a couple of fingers like that. You can get it done in half the time. So I've made the holes. Now I'm going to get the seeds. So you just drop it in like that to begin with. Now with beans, you may feel that they don't get all the way down the hole, so you can just help them on by just pushing them down to the base afterwards. So that's all done. Last few things to do is to just cover over the holes like that. Now give it another surface water, and then don't forget to label. So that's basically the basics to module sowing and how simple it is as a process. There really isn't actually that much to it. I think a lot of things get overcomplicated, so I just thought I'd show you a really simple method to doing it. Now if you want to review anything, you can use the chapters in the video just to go back and have a look. There'll also be some top tips in the video description, so you can read through those. And just to let you know, this is the first start in the series of just kind of basic sowing and growing things, but in terms of more masterclasses. So just trying to get into as much detail as needed. I'm not trying to put too much information on you in one go. Instead, I'm going to spread it out over a series of videos. So for example, ones that are coming up are going to be seedling care, so how to look after your seedlings, transplanting, direct sowing, things like that, just to really help you as the season progresses. So I look forward to seeing you again soon, and happy growing on this beautiful start to this new growing season.